Access Yellow Springs.
And the community. Okay. All right. I'm letting people in.
Okay, you're being broadcast right now, Eric.
Hello, everybody. We're going to give people just a couple more minutes before we give our opening remarks. So please just sit tight. Everybody's muted, but we'll be rolling in just a few minutes. Let's see. Just one more minute. We got some dead air here. Sorry about that. But
Karen Mulhauser says, Happy Earth Day. Thank you, Karen. Happy Earth Day.
Hi, Kim. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you.
Me too.
Karen, you look great.
I'll get going. So I'm Eric Miller. I'm hosting tonight. I'm class of 81 and I'm a major gifts officer at the college and also work with alumni relations. April Wolford this lecture series is her brainchild, and she got it started. But she had more duties added to her schedule, so I took on the production of this, which is pretty cool. I really enjoy it. I would be here anyway. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get rolling. Everybody should be aware that we are recording. Actually, I'm not sure if we hit the record button yet. But we will be recording if we're not. And then also it's being broadcast on local public access channels. Sean Devine works with the Channel 5 on the cable, Spectrum cable. And there's also a YouTube channel for Channel 5. So it'll be broadcast there as well, live. So we're live now, actually, as I speak. So your mics are muted while Kim is giving her presentation. But then there's going to be plenty of time for Q&A afterward, and you'll have complete control of your mics after that. Most of you, but not all, are familiar with the stack way of it's a way of kind of raising your hand and letting people know that you have a question or a statement that you want to speak. And I'll watch. You should just write the word stack in the comments section, which you can see at the bottom of your screen, a button for commenting and reactions. You can write your question in there as well if you like, but I'm likely to call on you to read your question when it's your turn. So, and if you don't want to, maybe somebody else can read it for you. And then just one last thing is, this is a lecture series. So in the if you go to the Antioch College alumni page and look at upcoming events, they are listed there and they're easy to access, which you've probably already been there since you've already registered once. But please keep your eye on it because things are being posted frequently. So for example, next week, the Coretta Scott King Center Legacy Celebration is going to be happening, and it's sisterhood and social justice. So please check that out and attend. So that's it for the housekeeping. Let me introduce Dr. Landsbergen. Kim Landsbergen is a forest ecosystem scientist who joined the faculty of Antioch College in 2014. Her research has examined the structure and function of forests for trees, from trees to soil to canopies. Her research has also examined the potential impacts of climate change on forest carbon dynamics, as well as invasive species biology. She is certified senior ecologist through the Ecological Society of America. At Antioch, she mentors students in research and independent study projects and teaches courses in plant biology, ecology, soils, and applied science. A scientist who believes in application of science in policy making. Kim has been engaged in environmental and social justice policy issues at the state and national level, engaging in direct action as well as citizen lobbying for change. So please welcome Kim. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for that excellent introduction. Can everybody hear me okay? Great.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm looking for the share screen button. Share screen, thank you. Okay. One participant can share. I'm looking for that function for me. Okay, here we go. Thank you. And my dog is grumbling at me. This is embarrassing. Okay. Hang on, Gracie. There we go. Play.
Play. Just hit play.
Thank you. There we go. There you go. Okay, thank you. So who am I? I'm a forest ecologist. I'm an associate professor of biology and environmental science at Antioch College. I'm also a big believer in translating science to the general public and just sharing scientific findings with my students and my colleagues and my friends. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram as Tree Biology. And I also have a website that has more information about me and my research and the work that I do with my students and kind of my professional practice at kimlandsbergen.com.
I'll put that in the chat.
Thank you. So I have a talk outline here, and I'm hoping that my talk might be 35 or 40 minutes, maybe not even that long, because I feel like we have a lot to discuss. So I want to talk about sort of the context of normal political change. We know that we live in a mostly two-party country, where the executive office tends to go back and forth between Democrat and Republican. And when that happens, there's obviously kind of a tempo of political change in terms of how our government works. I want to kind of talk a little bit about the history and our framework for environmental protection in the United States. I also want to talk about why executive power matters. So we're coming up to 100 days of President Biden's new administration. And what this talk is going to be focusing on is a very, very 30,000 feet elevation, view of some of the major ways that the Trump administration has created massive environmental change. And some of that will be easy and quick to fix, and some of it will take decades. So then I will provide a lot of examples of major environmental setbacks, and then conclude with some slides in terms of what President Biden has on his agenda and looking ahead. And then we'll wrap up with some conversation. I also want to plug an online teach-in that we've been doing with my colleagues, mainly organized by Kevin Magruder, our Vice President of Academic Affairs. We started doing this in January of this year as a response to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And so many people were shocked to say, I can't believe this is happening. Is this really us? Is this really America? And when we were having a conversation as colleagues, we were really actually saying, like, yeah, this is us. So we've been having this teach-in series, and we'll have another one on May 2021. So why me? Why this talk? This is an actor with a castle in his head, but I selected this slide because I think about this metaphor of memory castles, or creating a memory palace in your mind. And I can just say that for 4 years, and I also need to say that my perspective on this talk, I'm going to be providing my own personal opinion, and I'm also going to be providing kind of journalistic facts from things like, the New York Times, Washington Post. And I will also say that, this is history that is actively unfolding right now in our country. And, the Trump administration's impacts on our country and our world will be the stuff of many, many dissertations. It will take a long time to actually understand what are the forces that put him in power and kept him in power, and all of the different ways that has had an effect. But what I will say is I spent about 4.5 years waking up every day, and as I believe they call it, doom scrolling, looking at my phone every morning and wondering what terrible thing would be happening. And so many of you may be feeling that way or have felt that way in the past, and are maybe feeling some relief right now that you're not waking up and doom scrolling every day, and maybe being relieved to find some things changing in a direction that you're pleased with. So I put this picture here because I think about my own memory palace in my mind. And in putting this talk together, I realized I had taken a lot of my feelings and thoughts and exasperation and pain about the environmental impact of the Trump administration. I think I jammed it in a room and slammed the door in my own memory palace. And I think that we're tempted to do that. And what I would ask is that we don't do that. I think what the last 4 years has shown us in terms of these environmental impacts are the vulnerabilities in our system that we need to shore up. I think it's showing us, although we have these norms, how much the last 4 years have operated beyond any norm we've ever seen before in terms of governance. So I feel like the content of this talk is essential. And I am not a policy expert, but I consider myself to be a policy wonk and a very well-informed scientist who's very passionate about this. So there are many other experts on this, but as an Antiochian, one of the reasons why I love working at Antioch is because even as a scientist, this side of me finds a welcome home here. And the idea of winning victories for humanity, as Horace Mann, entreats us to do, is something that I feel that we should do. So if I have all this training in terms of environmental science, I feel like I should be stepping up. Okay, so I know that we have at least one physicist in the house watching today, so I wanted to put a physics pendulum diagram here that talks about energy and motion. But what it's really showing is the norms of what I call the political pendulum. So if you have a Republican in the White House, kind of at the top of many, many administrations, you're going to have like the new Department of Energy director, the new Department of Justice director. All of those are executive appointments. So some of you may know this, but some of you may not. So I'm just not going to make any assumptions about what people know, and I'm just going to review this. So there's always kind of the cutoff of the mountain at the top. If you think about an agency, like a federal agency, like the Department of Energy or the Environmental Protection Agency, it's basically this hierarchical mountain where there's a director at the top, and the first kind of ranks of people working there are put in place through political appointments. But everybody else who works at those agencies tends to be people who spend decades there, irrespective of how they vote, irrespective of what they believe politically. Our state and federal and local governments are filled with people who show up, people who do their jobs. So whether or not, you're swinging right or you're swinging left, what's happening is usually what's typical, what's the norm is kind of the top of that administrative mountain gets shaved off. And then you might have Republicans appointing Republicans, and then, the executive office flips, and then there's going to be executive appointees that are Democrats. And so that is kind of a normal oscillation that we see with federal agencies. Now, I think the Trump administration took this to a level that we haven't seen before. So not only were these, typical, people at the top who get purged and appointed, political reappointed, but all of those people propagated an attitude of absolute loyalty or get out. So one of the things that we'll talk about later is this idea, it's almost this belief that loyalty to the dear leader is more important than technical expertise. And I see a few people shaking their heads, and I know this is bringing up painful memories, but this loss of expertise is part of what we're going to be feeling for a very long time to come. So during the Trump administration, during the Reagan administration, we had James Watt in charge of the EPA. Even that seemed really drastic. But what's happened in the last 4 years goes beyond any kind of norm that we've really seen. So President Nixon, some of you may not know that the Environmental Protection Agency, which is our federal agency, and in this talk, I'm going to refer to that as the EPA, it was founded in 1970 by a Republican president. Congress passed, I'm looking for my cursor here, sorry. I'm trying to minimize my cursor. Boop. Anyway, I can't read all of my screen, so I'm going to just go for it. 51 years ago, and so today is Earth Day, and 51 years ago in 1970 was the first Earth Day, and it was also when the Nixon administration kind of brought the EPA into being. And I've included this slide, this image of Pennsylvania in 1948. So prior to and I'll talk about some major pieces of environmental legislation. But prior to, the late 60s and 70s, we had as many environmental problems in the United States as you might see reported today in India in terms of bad air quality, or maybe in Beijing in terms of coal burning and polluting the air. And we've all heard of the example of the Cuyahoga River catching fire in Cleveland multiple times. So environmental quality was really, truly terrible post-World War II, in the kind of the big age of industry, and then going into the 60s and 70s. So Congress passed almost unanimously. It was completely unanimous in the Senate, and then with one vote in terms of I'm thinking of the Clean Air Act. So at that time, that everything was bipartisan, this push for the environment. So not like now. So Congress passed law. So how it works is Congress would say, we're going to do a major piece of legislation like the Endangered Species Act or the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act. And then once both houses, both Congress, both the House and the Senate reconciles their two versions of the bill, then it goes to the president to sign it and to put it into law. So once those major environmental laws have been passed and signed into law, then federal agencies have to enforce them. So I made myself laugh looking for diagrams about the rulemaking process online. And I will say that I am married to a professor at Ohio State that teaches administrative law at the John Glenn College of Public Affairs. So Dave and I talk all the time about rulemaking, about administrative law. It's kind of nice. And then I talk to him about environmental issues. So we're two geeks at home. But where this matters is essentially Congress is creating these public laws. So if we're starting on the left-hand side of the screen. So Congress will create this public law, so an enabling a statute, and then once the president signs into law, then agencies actually have to carry out what that law says. So there's a thing called rulemaking. So once the law is passed, think about that as kind of a big framework. But rulemaking actually fills in the blanks. So how many parts per million of mercury is allowed in the air? That's what the agency comes up with. So in 1970, if you think back to that time, if some of you were alive during that time, we didn't have a lot of sophisticated chemical instrumentation that might even allow us to measure lead to, really the fine ability that we can now. So rulemaking and rule updating is a constant process. So there are opportunities for public review and public comment. So the rulemaking process is essentially how agencies take these public laws and enact them into laws that they can do. So I found a flow chart and I thought we would go through that really quickly. So, and the reason why this matters is because if you have an executive branch like President Trump's and his administration that he put into play, these are all the places where rules can be broken or rules can be ignored. So in a normal scenario, this is how it works. So regulations and rules are the means by which agencies use to implement and further define the requirements from enacted statute. And a statute is this law that's passed by Congress. So federal agencies like the EPA, like the Fish and Wildlife Service, they receive their authority to propose or issue these rules under their jurisdiction passed by Congress. Okay, so how does that go? Congress passes the law, and then the agency creates a draft rule, and then the draft rule is reviewed by the agency. And then it goes to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs and Management and Budget to see okay, you're going to do this rule. How does it fit with everything else? How much does it cost? Then we're on step 4. Then a notice of the proposed rule is published in the Federal Register. So there's actually a website called regulations.gov. And if you really want to put yourself to sleep, you can start checking through regulations.gov to find out all the proposed rules that are on the books, all these changes. So, and why would we do that? Because there by law is at least a 30-day public comment period that is open once things are published on the Federal Register. So then after those comments are received, the agency is supposed to review them, and then they issue a final draft. And then we're at step 8, the final rule is reviewed and approved. And then the rule gets published, the final deal in the Federal Register, and then you can enact it. So if you start Googling for a flow chart of federal rulemaking process, you'll see things online that look like piles of spaghetti. So this looks pretty complicated, but there are many, many places where lobbyists can step in, or where an agency that has an appointee, a political appointee, can just say, maybe we're going to sit on this for a while. So I think as it relates to how our environmental laws work, this becomes really important. So let me give you an example. So the Clean Air Act of 1970, and this is really interesting. I'm going to hold this up. This is this month's National Geographic. So this is April 2021. We're still fighting for clean air. So this is an ongoing fight. So the Clean Air Act of 1970 is a comprehensive federal law that regulates air emissions from air, area, stationary, and mobile sources. And this law gives the Environmental Protection Agency the legal authority to set these air quality standards. So the headline here on National Geographic, so you may not read it, but you recognize that gold border on this magazine, I bet. It says air pollution causes 7 million premature deaths a year, but we can fix it. So unless you're living in a place that is unbelievably air polluted, air pollution is kind of a silent killer. So there are small particulates, there are other chemicals in the air, and the EPA is supposed to have the authority to act and make sure that everywhere we have clean air, but it's still not working very well. And why not? So the Clean Air Act is one of many, many federal environmental laws. So kind of the big ones are the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Toxic Substances Control Act, and NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. But all of these different big federal laws kind of cover lots of different things like energy, food, power, atomic energy, migratory birds. So you'll see this slide a couple of times because once again, this talk is aimed at saying, well, okay, because I'll just say it. During the election cycle, I did hear a lot of people say, man, these guys are the same. Aren't they the same? Does it matter who I vote for? And my answer is yes, it really matters. And I think that if people are saying it doesn't matter, maybe they don't understand the power of the executive office to make this change and how we are all living with this change, or in some cases dying with this change. Okay, so executive power matters because you can make appointments. So Trump can say, I don't want any of those people there. I want my people there. And it doesn't necessarily matter that they have the technical expertise to review it. So Trump, as we know, probably all politicians have pretty large egos, but his was unbelievably huge. And he absolutely refused to listen to science. And I think we have more than 500,000 people dead today because of COVID, because he refused to listen to science. He refused to actually listen and be guided by the expertise of scientists. So he signed executive orders, getting rid of science advisory committees. So one person says it's no longer death by 1,000 cuts, it's taking a knife to the jugular. One science advisory said of the executive order to eliminate 1/3 of science advisory boards. So as an executive, he can say, nope, we're not going to listen to scientists and in fact, fire all those people. Now you can also choose who is going to run your agency. So the first head of the Trump EPA was a guy named Scott Pruitt. And one of the things that he did, and so I'm sorry, when we had a conversation before the talk began, and one of my colleagues said, are you going to warn people how intense this talk is going to be? And I'm like, I guess we kind of already know. But maybe you've had all of this stuff shut in your own mind. But I think it is important to unpack it. So Scott Pruitt was President Trump's first EPA executive appointment. So what that means is he's the person in charge. Imagine being a person at the wheel. So you're steering the agency and you're also deciding whether to step on the gas or put on the brake, right? So you're providing guidance. And you're also saying, you know what, we're really not going to enforce that rule, even though it's on the books. So they don't change the law, but they change the rulemaking part and how the rules are enforced. And maybe we're going to scrap that rule and we're going to start a new rule. So Pruitt was a lobbyist. Prior to being appointed for the EPA, he was receiving a lot of money from the Oil and Gas Administration. And by the time he resigned, so he was basically pushed out of office because he was under investigation by the General Accounting Office, the EPA Inspector General, which is a legal investigation branch, the White House Office of Management and Budget, over his spending habits, conflict of interest, extreme secrecy. So he was into secrecy so much that he actually spent $25,000 to install in his office a soundproof booth. so that he could have private conversations and people would know who he's talking to or what is being said. So he was, when things get pretty bad that you're bounced out of the Trump administration, it's pretty bad. So this guy left. But the person who replaced him might have been less flashy, but also was a coal lobbyist. So also had a lot of ties to the fossil fuel industry. Why does that matter? If we're talking about climate change, when you burn fossil fuels, you release a lot of greenhouse gases. So we'll conclude this talk by talking about the Biden administration and some of the challenges that we have turning all of this around. So if you want to continue with the metaphor of driving and navigation, if we want to go a particular way to reduce greenhouse gases and to fight climate change as it's happening and global warming, we literally have to steer away from fossil fuels. We have to decarbonize our economy. And we've known this for decades. But the Trump administration chose to ignore all of that science and literally steer us in the other direction for financial gain. So this guy, Andrew Wheeler, prior to being appointed the director of the EPA, the second director of the Trump administration, he was a lawyer with a firm that represented Ohio's most famous coal magnate, a guy named Robert or Bob Murray, who recently passed away, and he was actively working as a lobbyist for a coal firm. And this is a picture of Bob Murray. So he's the man who's pointing. And the person at the head of the desk is Rick Perry, who was the first appointment of the Department of Energy. So during this time, and Andrew Wheeler is the person in the foreground with the red tie. So they literally, at the beginning of the Trump administration, the guy who privately owned one of the biggest coal companies in the United States from Ohio went with his lobbyist, Andrew Wheeler, who's at this table, and presented Rick Perry, who was formerly the governor of Texas, big ties to oil and gas, with a memo that said, this is what I want your energy administration to do. So he literally gave him a marching order on that. And because these things have now been made public, you can actually read the memo from the Murray Energy Corporation to Rick Perry, who was the Secretary of Energy at the time. So this is in August 2017, and he's from St. Clairsville, Ohio, is where this organization is based. Another trick that the Trump administration would do is they would appoint agency heads in a temporary capacity. It's like you're the acting person, you're the acting director, because the Senate has the ability, the Senate is charged with agency oversight. So if Scott Pruitt is being appointed to the EPA, it's the Senate who reviews him. The Senate holds public hearings. That goes into like C-SPAN and C-SPAN 2. Like if you want to check out congressional hearings and like go to sleep a little bit more, but that's actually what they're supposed to do. But if you appoint somebody as temporary, they don't go through Senate review. So this is a little trick that they've been doing. And this is someone who, towards the end of the Trump administration, a federal judge kicked out the person who was the temporary Bureau of Land Management director. So if you live out west, a lot of federal land is under the Bureau of Land Management supervision. And so it's a very big deal that this federal judge actually removed this person, because kind of towards the end of the Trump administration, people were beginning to say, look, this person has been in the temporary position for so long, we really need to do senatorial review. But what I do want to say is this situation is not just entirely of Trump's making. The GOP in general definitely enabled so much of what Trump was able to achieve in 4 years. And what I mean by that is I remember when this was happening, July 2016, the Republican convention, the Republican National Convention, was actually held in Cleveland. And two of our art professors at the time brought a bunch of Antioch students and actually went to Cleveland and interviewed people and made a fantastic film that won an award, actually. So this is a photo of a woman reading the Republican platform. And the Republican platform very narrowly passed, but it did pass. And it is very much a marching order of many of the things that came to pass from 2016 to 2020. And I'm just going to read a few of them. So the biggest goals in terms of the kind of anti-environment plan that's in this platform, number one is cancel the Clean Power Plan. So the Clean Power Plan was the EPA's program to reduce carbon pollution. The biggest pipes that put out greenhouse gases in the United States are energy manufacturing facilities. So places that burn coal, places that burn gas. So if you want to think about them as our biggest, most obvious tailpipes, the Clean Power Plan was designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So they were just going to get rid of that. It's a rule for the Clean Air Act. Point number two, build the Keystone XL pipeline and many more oil and gas pipelines like it. Number three, eliminate federal fracking regulation. So fracking is hydraulic fracturing, and it's a way of getting oil and gas. Number four, oppose any carbon tax. So not only get rid of the rule that allows us to monitor and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but another mechanism that people have wanted to do is monetize carbon and then tax bigger carbon reductions. So the platform opposes carbon tax. And then expedite export terminals for liquefied natural gas. That's a little technical, but what it means is if fracking is happening in the Dakotas, if fracking is happening in Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, if you can frack anywhere, you can frack. What are you going to do with all that gas? Well, we're going to export it. So pipelines are being built all over to take fracked gas and oil and bring them to places where that natural gas can be compressed into liquid natural gas to ship it across the ocean. So we want to expedite, not only do we want fracking, not only do we want to kill federal fracking regulations, we want to have terminals online to export that gas. What that means is that Americans bear the environmental brunt of the fracking itself, of the environmental pollution, of leaky pipelines. Think about the Standing Rock movement. We bear that environmental brunt so that a very few people can profit and export that energy overseas. Abolish the EPA as we know it. So Matt Getz and a couple of other people from, I believe, Texas and Florida actually proposed to eliminate that agency. They actually wrote a bill to do it. The bill didn't pass, but actually abolishing the EPA is actually in the Republican 2016 platform. Stop environmental regulatory agencies from settling lawsuits out of court. So when an agency does not do its job of enforcing a law like the Clean Air Act, environmental groups sue to force it to do its job. If the agency thinks it's going to lose, then they might settle out of court, and that is what this platform aims to prevent. Fighting in court until every last appeal is dead can make cases drag on for years, and this is what the Republican platform wanted. Quote, forbid the EPA to regulate carbon dioxide. I think that's pretty obvious. So if the EPA cannot regulate carbon dioxide, we do not have a federal agency that can effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Another point, quote, turn federal lands over to the states. That's huge. So think about Bureau of Land Management land, national wilderness areas, Forest Service land. That should all go to states for privatization, of course. Quote, revoke the ability of the president to designate national monuments. So no longer would presidents be able to designate national monuments to protect them. Lastly, halt funding for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So the United States would no longer donate money or participate in the United Nations Framework for Climate Change. So this is what we were voting for, and this is what won. And I will say that these environmental factors barely got into that platform, but get into it they did. Okay, we talked about executive orders. here's some examples. So Congress is supposed to supervise agencies, but if you have the executive orders changing how those agencies run, then that kind of trumps everything, literally. So in June 2020, there are executive orders that basically allowed agencies to accelerate quote unquote energy projects, think pipelines and the wall, to set aside the Endangered Species Act and also the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA. So the New York Times has a gigantic compendium of more than 100 major ways that the Trump administration manifested enormous environmental impacts across the board, everything that you can think of. The regulation of chemicals called PFAS or PFOA, if you saw the movie Dark Waters. The US EPA weakened their controls on mercury when you're burning coal, so some heavy metals get released into the air. Also, we withdrew as a country, Trump, so this is from the BBC. It's always very interesting if you don't read international news. Reading international news during the Trump administration provided a very different picture of how other countries see us. And if you haven't done that, I really urge you to develop that habit. So the climate change agreement, which President Biden rejoined and kind of hosted a summit on today, was something that our country formally withdrew from in 2017. So executive power matters because you can purge the disloyal. Who does that sound like? It sounds like many other authoritarian dictators, purging the disloyal, valuing loyalty more than expertise. So there was a USDA group of, I think it's called ARS, it's a group of scientists and statisticians that summarize all of the stuff that we need to know about crops and agriculture in the United States. Think about buying and selling commodities, right? How many barrels of wheat, how many pork bellies, all of these kinds of things. Keeping up with agricultural statistics takes an army of people. And one of the things that happened was this Trump-appointed agency executive deliberately wanted to move the office of all of these analysts and scientists to Missouri from Washington, D.C. So imagine, you've spent decades in Washington, D.C., you own a home there, your children are going to school there, your whole life is there. And then all of a sudden you're told that you have to report for work in 3 months in a new place in Missouri as opposed to where you're accustomed to living. So the headline here is many USDA workers quit as research agencies move to Kansas City. Quote, "This is the brain drain we all feared." So this kind of loss of expertise, if you can recover it, takes a really, really long time. And there's so much to say about the wall, I couldn't even make a slide. I just had to write the wall because the wall is such a disaster for humanitarian reasons, for environmental reasons, for financial reasons. But there's an organization called the Center for Biological Diversity that spent a lot of time looking at how migratory animals are going to be impacted by the wall. And also how indigenous people and indigenous lands are being impacted by the wall. So that is many dissertations in the making. One of the ways that this came to my attention, kind of the threat of the Trump administration, was after his election in November 2016, there was a lot of buzz on the internet about how people were scared that the Trump administration would actually start deleting data from websites, public information about science. And there was a big push for people between the election day in November and inauguration in January 2017. People were frantically harvesting data from websites and then caching it in places like Canada, being terribly afraid that all of this information would be purged. So personnel purged, information purged, data purged. As citizens, our ability to access and understand that gone. This is a snapshot of a t-shirt that I bought when I was in DC. So I think in 2017, I went to DC for a lot of reasons. I was there in January for the Women's March for the inaugural weekend. And then I came back for the March for Science. And I could not believe how many scientists were there and people supporting science. And as a young scientist, I was sort of raised with the idea that scientists should remain neutral. But I think if you study the systems that you love, if you study, animals that are in danger of extinction, if you study, ecosystems that are rare and threatened, if you don't stand up for them and encourage our elected officials to do the same, then all of that study is lost. So there was a tremendous push there and kind of consistently has been. I'm wrapping up pretty quickly here. So another thing that the Trump administration did was they decided to, instead of actually canceling the EPA's Office for Environmental Justice, they just ceased to fund it. So that's another way that you can disable parts of agencies and the way the government works. You can just say, well, you know what? We're going to zero out the funding for that. We're not going to formally close that office, but we're going to not fund it. So the funding fight is big. Whew. Okay. So I'm looking at my watch. I told you it was going to be about 40 minutes. That's where we're at. So looking ahead, what is happening now? What is happening now is that pendulum is swinging back the other way. So appointees that can be reappointed, that is happening. The new director of the Environmental Protection Agency is a bit of I would say, a kind of a corporate creature. So I'm curious to see how he is going to be, but compared to people like Scott Pruitt and Andrew Wheeler, he is a really big improvement. So Biden wants to slash emissions. And so one of the things when we say emissions, we mean greenhouse gas emissions. And my last slide is Happy Earth Day. This slide is red hot. I did a screenshot at 5:51 today. So Biden has hosted a leadership summit on climate today on Earth Day. And he is committing the United States to cutting our emissions in half. So I've just dragged you through like a really painful exercise of thinking about all the ways that the Trump administration really caused damage in terms of much of our capacity and our ability to kind of know what's going on environmentally. But what I think is actually really good is that we have a chance to make some change now. So with that, I will take questions, and I want to say thank you for attending, and I hope we can now have some conversation about some of this together.
Yay! Good job, Kim.
Thanks.
So you can now unmute yourselves and also write in the chat window if you'd like to speak.
I want to say that, well, first, I was really excited to be a part of this tonight because I'm interested in environmental policy, like as part of my degree here at Antioch. So I was really excited to get some insight on not only environmental policy in general, but currently what has happened. And the talk, it definitely scares me that this is possible, that the people in power have this power to do these things and that they even want to do these things. That, it saddens me and it scares me, but also it motivates me to continue my education and, just get a job in this career field and really try to, work towards bettering this, fixing this.
Thank you. So Karen?
Thank you, and what a great statement, Mckenzie. I did not know what to expect with tonight's presentation, but I knew that whatever Kim said, I would appreciate hearing. But some of you know that I live in your nation's capital, Washington, D.C., just 8 blocks from the Capitol. And so policy and advocacy are my middle names. And I just was so pleased to hear you present this kind of background. And it is true that things can change by who we elect. And if we're not pleased with the policies, that means we're probably not pleased with the policymakers, and we can change that. And so most of what I've been doing most of my life, even before moving to DC, has been to educate and advocate. And if we don't like the policies, we have to change the policymakers. And Kim, I'm saying this in front of lots of witnesses. If you'd like me to speak to one of your classes about that, I'd love to do that.
I'm going to sign you up for the fall. I teach Intro to Environmental Science in the fall. I'll sign you up. Thank you.
And when we can start having co-op students come to our town again, I'd love to help place them in places where they can learn more about the environment and environment policy.
So David, you're next.
Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to say this is a fantastic presentation, and I really liked the analysis of how fascism can really deteriorate a body, a federal body. But I was curious to know if Kim, you thought maybe that by giving more autonomy or more power to these advisory bodies, especially like in those who are more expertise, have more expertise in those fields, in those positions, if giving them more power would prevent things like this from happening, so that they can't just be, slated off with an executive order, things like that, or how that would be done.
That's a very interesting question. And I would say a parallel to that is a movement. I mean, I just want to say for all of you who might have had like a particular thing that I should have said or something I didn't cover that I should have, I'm sorry. Because if you can imagine that this could be many, many books. This could be, and the thing I didn't mention is that, and I wrote it in the chat box, it's not voting for just the top of the ticket. Voting for state and local government matters a lot. Because what I didn't talk about is that there's a federal EPA, but there's also a state environmental protection, or some states have a Department of Environmental Protection. So it's kind of a chain of events. So there's federal legislation that has to be enacted by the federal agency, but we also have state agencies. So let me give you an example. And I'm not dodging your question or comment, but my answer is twofold. One of them is how we vote at the state level matters. So during the Obama administration, the Clean Power Plan development. So Obama said, we're going to regulate CO2 industrially, which means we're going to make a commitment to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Wow, what if we had actually started doing that 15 years ago or even 30 years ago? It would have made a big difference. But all that being said, the Obama administration had that plan. And they said to all the states, you know what? Every state is different. Where you get your energy from is different. Washington State gets energy from hydropower. We get energy from coal in Ohio. So what we should do is allow every state to make up their own diet, let's say, of how they're going to make energy. And so this is this autonomy that you're talking about. Like your solution should be local. Ohio, as a state, drug their feet. We did not prepare our own state level report for the Clean Power Plan. They just didn't, chose not to do it. So if you have a state agency that chooses to ignore the feds, there's not much mechanism to make that comply, other than the power of the vote. So speaking of empowering local people, a big movement now is to recognize the environmental stewardship of Indigenous people. And I think that people at our college are very interested in that and working in that direction too. So I hope I addressed your question as best I could.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So, Marianne, would you like to state your question, or shall I read it?
Sure. So the Village Council of Yellow Springs has a goal for 2021 of creating a climate action and sustainability plan. And our environmental commission is currently working on this plan, which would also involve the college and nonprofits like Tecumseh Land Trust, Community Solutions, businesses, et cetera. So we haven't really talked with the college. And in light of the trashing at the national level that you've just enumerated, I'm wondering what you see as the role specifically of the college, Antioch College, and Yellow Springs in addressing this situation.
Thank you, Marianne. And I want to say thank you also for your leadership in the village of Yellow Springs. And I think if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you were the person who helped create the Environmental Commission there. So Yellow Springs is really ahead of the game in many ways environmentally. But for some of you who are joining from afar, you may not know that Yellow Springs is a village that has less than 4,000 people. So it's kind of an optimized microcosm in the middle of a fairly large state that is very much still not there yet. What I think Antioch College and private colleges have, the power that we have to do something, the power that Yellow Springs has to do. The state of Ohio is kind of like the state of Oklahoma or Texas, and keeping an eye on the public schools that they fund. So people at Ohio State may not have the same freedom academically to give the presentation that I just gave. So the academic freedom that small colleges has is precious. And I think that that's something that I really value about working at this school, that values this work. So I think as a private college, we have a voice that we can use and should use. So that's my answer about that. I think we could even, think about creating a public forum, something like this that could be emulated in other schools and other communities. I in some ways, like if I was going to be a teacher and give Yellow Springs a grade for environmental sustainability, I would say, we're at a 96%. That's an A. And maybe the answer is, well, how do we get the other 4%? Because I have students who are like, well, I want 100%. I don't just want a 96. But I think the challenge that we have actually is how we get the rest of the state to at least a B. I think that's our challenge. And I don't know the answer to that, but it's a challenge that I think that we really, if we're going to really make a change, it has to be at scale. Environmental problems are spatially diffuse, and they're challenging. As social problems, they're what are known as wicked problems. So if we live in isolation and say we're gonna lead by example, but we fail to move the hearts and minds of the rest of Ohio, then I think we may not really achieve what we need to do in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and large scale change.
Kim, I'd like to just give an example of for a response at the local regional level, in terms of both what you suggest as a forum and the complexity of the issues. There's a large energy company that has bought up leases on, I forget how many acres, and outside to east of Yellow Springs, the amount of land is equivalent to the size of Yellow Springs, which is about 2 square miles. And they want to put make these into solar farms. So this project, which would create solar and non-greenhouse gas energy, and it's been it's contracting with a very large company. So all of this electricity, of course, the electrons don't go to that company, but they're paying for this energy, will be a good thing, basically, and yet it will take all of this farmland out of commission. So it's also governed by the Ohio Public Power something or other, so that the townships can't have any say over it, really. So this is an example of the complexity of pitting farmland. Admittedly, it's not organic farming. It's, soybeans and corn using pesticides and fertilizers against solar energy. Very, at minimum, interesting, but of course it's much more than interesting. And so to have the expertise to be able to, for people and local governments to be able to deal with these kind of things is very important, I think.
So Denwood, is your question rhetorical or should we discuss it?
I'm giving this. Oh, sorry.
It's just an observation. That's all. Just an observation.
So then, Jackie, go ahead.
Thanks. Kim, first, I wanted to applaud you for so succinctly describing the federal regulatory program. As someone that spent 32 years implementing two sections of two acts, one the Clean Water Act and one the Rivers and Harbors Act as a wetland scientist, it is not an easy thing to grasp. More power to you for doing it. And I guess just the comment that I wanted to make was as someone that worked through a number of administrations, although there are a lot of changes that occur at the top, it's the worker bees, and I was a worker bee at the bottom that really can implement change. Regardless of what happens on the top, there are good people that are trying to do good work. There's also a lot of dead weight. I know that when I started working, I thought everybody would feel like me. I was willing to lay down and die for wetland resources, but that is clearly not the case. For a lot of people, it's just a job, and that's unfortunate. But there are opportunities everywhere for public citizens to walk in and walk in and get engaged in any project, big or small, simply by choosing to comment at any step of the way in a project development process. I know I try to do it locally when I can, and I just think everybody should try to do it too. So more power to you, Kim.
I want to respond to that. I'm applauding you, Jackie, because you're right. And I have a friend who's managed to work at USAID as a biodiversity expert through the Bush years. I think George W. Bush is delighted right now that Trump has given him an opportunity to only be the second worst president in the United States. And now he's being kind of redeemed as someone who's a painter and gee gosh, really nice guy. But I was trying to explain to my students today about what yellow cake uranium is and the whole march to war, et cetera, et cetera. I don't mean to digress. But my point being, the professionals who make these agencies work, I have a tremendous amount of respect for. And at the state level, I know people at the Ohio EPA, and I may not vote the way that they do, but this is something I'm trying to share with my students at Antioch. If we both agree that we want to protect wetlands in Ohio or restore wetlands in Ohio, we can be allies on this issue. We may not agree about other things, but we can and should work together on this issue. And so it hurt me so much to see during the Trump administration, long-term professionals being driven out of work, people who were pretty close to retirement who just said, man, I'm out of here. I'm not putting up with this. People took early retirement. People were pushed out of their offices. And that is a tremendous loss of expertise for our country.
Okay. Sean Mahoney.
Hi, Aunt Kim. Great talk. I'm glad I got to come and see it. I think what I was most surprised about throughout the whole talk was just how clear the Republican agenda was when as you read through those 11 bullet points, and each one was just like a major kind of devastating loss, environmentally in some way. I wanted to ask if you think that this new hot take that Biden's plan to reduce our carbon footprint by 50% by 2030, if you think that's ambitious enough.
Thank you, Sean. Sean graduated from the University of Dayton, and he's my godson, and he lives in New Jersey, and he's an environmental chemist. And Sean has agreed to also speak with my class in the fall because he's an expert. So Sean, you're working on PFAS, right? On techniques to measure these forever chemicals?
Yeah, I work in an environmental lab, and we're going to become certified to analyze for PFAS. So I'm doing that analysis.
Awesome. Thank you. I guess I do. I mean, at some point, you know, what did Kennedy say? We're going to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Mm-hmm. Like at some point, I think we have to recognize. So in terms of doom scrolling, I haven't stopped the environmental doom scrolling, maybe the political doom scrolling, but like, for example, this winter, the Arctic ice cap did not actually fully develop. So climate does not stop on a dime. Like even if we somehow, in some amazing way, in a universal way, all over the world, just, you know, do the work to reduce emissions, the trapped heat in our planet is going to continue to warm our planet. So I really would have to look at the numbers. Because I've been working on my talk and teaching today, I did not have a chance to really review the goals. But Marianne talked about a very sticky issue for Yellow Springs, which is this idea of like, where do we get this energy from? Where will this renewable energy come from? And I would say instead of not this, but this, I think we need to start getting used to the idea of yes and. Yes, we need large scale renewable, installations. And, maybe we don't want them in our backyard, but maybe that's the way we have to have them. And maybe we need them on all of our rooftops. And maybe we need to force federal subsidies to go to everyday people so that everyday people can access renewable power and not just bougie people. So, we really have to think about this infrastructure as an opportunity to renew our democracy. And industrial farming is not really a daisy walk. I mean, there's some really big problems with that. So it's going to be something I feel that we can spend time doing. Somebody mentioned Project Drawdown. I put the link in the website. It's a magnificent resource that allows people to think about things that they can do. But what I would say is I think that there's been a big push to kind of make people believe that it's up to us. Like, the climate is going to live or die, whether or not I'm a vegan or whether or not I choose to use plastic products. We cannot affect major scale change at that level. We do have to demand political power. We do have to demand political action. We have to elect people who consider this to be a priority. So I would say yes and not, you're wrong, I'm right. I think we need to do all of it.
So Roger, since you posted that, I think John will let me skip ahead just by one. Do you have anything else you want to ask about that or say about it, Roger? Unmute.
I heard a presentation on the Drawdown Project, and it was the first positive thing I've heard in 50 years of following environmental activity. And I think it's important to be able to have some positive energy behind us. And I'm glad that Kim mentioned it a little bit. I wanted to bring it up as something that all of us need to keep on top of and work with others in our communities to affect this political change.
Thank you. So John, John Knox.
Hi, you all, and this is really quite wonderful. Let me just say quickly, I know the folks that started Project Drawdown, and it is really exemplary, and it's worth looking at the book, but also at the website and at the ongoing science, because they're trying to have unassailable strategies that are available to us to take the carbon back. So, Kim, I was really interested in your thoughts about Ohio. I'm an Ohio boy myself, and my natal community is heavy into fracking. I wonder what, and you were talking about getting to a B. Now, I thought you were talking maybe about how to get other colleges lined up with some of these strategies. And I was also wanting to ask you about yours and the college's relationship to ASHE. So I guess I'm trying to think about partnerships. Project Drawdown, my buddies in Georgia have set up a state level drawdown effort. So people are taking the kind of big picture 30,000 foot lead from Project Drawdown and are trying to move it down. And there are lots of different things like this. And it's so important for Antioch's future to provide opportunities for students for analysis and understanding and knowledge building, and then about who's got their hands on the levers, not only in politics, but in public advocacy. So go for it.
So thank you. Comment, Kim, or?
I just want to directly respond. So ASHE is the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Ed, and we are a member of that organization. We have to pay funds to be a member and to maintain our membership. So if you have made a donation to the college, some of your funding is likely helping to support me, my students, and also this program. So what does that allow us to do? That one of the things that we've been doing is a program called STARS, and I'll find the website in a little bit, but it's a self-assessment, self-reporting project where we look at everything that we do, our curriculum, our dining, our landscaping, where our energy comes from, where the village's energy comes from, you name it, to literally kind of get the handle on what we're doing as a college. And so we, in the next year, we're up for STARS renewal. There may be some flexibility there because of the COVID year. Like I think everybody has just sort of had a difficult time keeping up administratively with everything. But we have a report that describes everything that we've been doing as a college, and I can share that in the chat box. And I think Project Drawdown is great, but I guess for me, my passion would be to not only be a shining example of what we can do and to work with other colleges, but to actually realize that if we're just 2 square miles in the middle of a coal field, that's really not going to change our environment. It's not going to stop global warming. So, maybe we can build coalitions, maybe we can get other people involved, but I do feel like we need to also practice having difficult conversations with our neighbors who aren't like us, and to build political power locally and regionally. So I just feel like that's really essential.
Thank you. Denwood, is that a question you want to ask, or is...
I'm just thinking of observations. I'm not really asking a question. Everybody else wants to comment, that's fine. It's just thoughts.
Okay. All right. So then Dan Saltman.
Hi, thank you, Kim. That was an excellent talk, and all points well taken. Here, I'll even well, and so I saw a thing about a company that was harvesting smokestack effluent and turning and capturing the CO2 out of that and turning it into fuel, into ethanol. And I thought that was really a great idea. So, but on a quick look at the solutions part of that, of the website there, I didn't see it there, but it might be hiding in there under something else. But I was wondering, if you knew anything about that and whether that looked like a good solution. And I actually had and I'm sorry, I have a second question too that I didn't type in there. The second question is, are there things that we could do, or what laws do you think could be passed that would prevent this kind of capricious management of the power of government to be this party or that party, and to sort of sustain the good continuity? I mean, the danger of what was said earlier about having some strength at the heads of the agencies is that then you get these guys who Trump appointed would still be in power today, and they would still be doing the stuff we didn't want them to do. So that's a solution that swings both ways. But maybe there's some sort of legal solution that says that there's some checks on executive power that don't let that sort of capricious nature of the incumbency drive the discussions, that there's some other driving force.
Wow. Dan, I'm going to answer your question in two parts. I'm going to answer the last one first. So I was working on kind of going through some key points here. And one of the things that I didn't come to was my last card. And I think it's what you just talked about. Whether or not we applaud Trump or whether or not we hate Trump or we don't care, I think we can say that he was effective at making a tremendous amount of change. I think we could probably agree that he made a lot of change. And I think that many of us might agree that change was horrific and came at an incredible cost of our, international reputation, of our psyche as a country, and how our young people, because working as a college professor is one of the best gifts of my life. Like, working with young people is an amazing thing. It's a big privilege. And I'll tell you, young people here today are not putting up with what has been going down. So if I can give you some faith in the future, our future held by people who are in their 20s and 30s today will not look like what it is right now. It will be very different. So that's some good thing. But what I can say is that, and I'm reading this from my card verbatim, is that Trump has highlighted and exploited vulnerabilities that we must shore up, right? So nobody ever did the things that he did because we just didn't think it was possible. And so people love him for that. But he worked beyond the pale where people just were like, well, wait a minute, isn't there something that should stop him from doing that? And the reality is no. So I think we need to enforce some kind of political action to point that up. So I think his bold, out-of-the-box destruction allowed us to see how fragile our democracy is. And if that doesn't wake people up, I don't know what will. Secondly, Dan, you asked a question about a methodology of capturing CO2 microbially. So actually getting, I think it's Chlamydomonas bacteria to consume CO2 to make ethanol. So there was I think I saw it on NewsHour, maybe they were PBS NewsHour. They were showing a demonstration of how they kind of came up with a concept, and then they're trying to do it at small scale and then asking, can we scale it up in an industrial way? And I think, here's what I think about carbon capture technology. I think that we really have to ask what scale of implementation we're really looking at. And I think that was kind of Marianne's comment about the scale of that solar infrastructure. It would be so much better for the environment if we didn't desperately try to get back to pre-COVID levels of greenhouse gas consumption. Like, we have to look at this moment as an opportunity to go, you know what, the world has slapped us upside the head, and what can we learn from this moment? Maybe we don't need to fly as much. So that fuel that they were talking about was creating a biofuel for airplanes. But look at this magnificent technology that we're using. I mean, admittedly, it uses computer energy, but it's nothing like flying. It's nothing like getting together, and we can share our thoughts and our faces and our ideas. And so I just think that we really need to radically rethink how we burn fossil fuels, how we burn energy. And I think that that's what Project Drawdown is asking us to do.
Thank you. So Robert Lake.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Kim. This was it was really interesting to listen to your presentation, and I really appreciate that you're highlighting these issues and calling attention to them. I just wanted to make 2 points, maybe raise 2 issues. One is in terms of the focus, and I think you're right to focus on the power of the administration and the appointment to agencies and the role of rulemaking and all of that sort of thing. But the top of the administration is only part of the story. And I know this was not your intent, but I think we have to guard against a way of thinking that would say, well, Trump was the problem and he did all these terrible things, but now we have Biden in the White House and so everything is cool, right? End of story, right? That's the beginning of the story, not the end of the story. But more importantly, and the second point I wanted to make is that focusing on rulemaking is absolutely important. And I watched with horror over the last 4 years as the regulatory agencies were taken over by the industries they were supposed to regulate. But you can only do rulemaking and regulating if there's a law, a statute that needs to be articulated through its rules. And so there's an important and a critical role here for the Congress, right? That if the Congress doesn't pass the law, then there's nothing for the agency to make a rule about. And I think that if we are looking for where we can be most effective in moving things in the direction that we want to, you need to look at the Senate, where the Democrats have 1 vote in the majority, and where we have already seen that the Democrats are passing law after law in the House and getting nowhere in the Senate to move these things into reality. And remember that in 2 years there's going to be a midterm election, and the House is in jeopardy. I think we have to remember back in 2008 when Obama was elected, and he managed to get the Affordable Care Act through, and 2 years later lost the House and lost the Senate, and wasn't able to pass a single piece of legislation after those first 2 years. If that happens this time, we're not going to be any better off than we were under Trump. So if you're looking for some place to put your energies, I would strongly want to encourage people to work on solidifying the Democratic rule positions in the House and in the Senate, so that we can get the legislation that we need.
I'm agreeing with you 100%, Robert. I am. And also my Congresswoman, Mary Jo Kilroy, lost her seat during that election cycle because of her yes vote for the ACA. So that's an example of something that we could do as colleges, going back to what John was saying. We could try to build a political coalition that is actually working for, registering voters. In fact, I was helping with voter registration, and my husband was too during, I think I saw him show up here. Hey, Dave. Voter, and I know that, I'm forgetting Goodman, one of our former board members, the Andrew Goodman Foundation is all about registering voters and empowering college students to vote. So I'm in agreement with you fully.
Teo.
Hi, Kim. Thank you so much for your presentation. So I keep thinking about the issue science and neutrality, or science and politics, not in the context of partisan politics. But I'm wondering about what are the discussions within your field and related fields regarding the relationship between the scientific work that you do, politics in general, and the public. I'm thinking a little bit of, if I remember correctly, the autobiographies of some physicists right after the books that were published a couple of years or decades after the atomic bomb was dropped. They had a highly sophisticated political philosophy and perspective, perhaps because they had to reckon with what some of their mentors and some of them had done to the world, or at least part of the role in that kind of participation. And I'm very curious about that possibility of engaging the public and scientists together in political discussions beyond that kind of partisan perspective. Are there any discussions? There are some fields, for example, in social sciences, and in their official history of the field, that might not be completely accurate, but they talk about themselves as, oh, this is a field with this very specific political commitment. I don't know if there are any equivalents in your field.
Yes, I'm actually, so if my arms are jiggling, it's because my dog is here and she's wanting a lot of attention. Here she is. She's saying, hi, what are we doing? Hey, everybody. Yes, maybe she wants a walk. So the Ecological Society of America and another organization I'm a member of, the American Geophysical Union, they do have policy groups within the organization. So the Ecological Society of America is the largest ecologist society in the world. And that's the organization that I have earned my senior ecologist certification through. And they also have training. So AAAS has training where scientists can learn how to lobby. And so I think this has actually changed significantly from when I was a young pup. So I think when I was in grad school, I took a course from two people who were the founders of the Society for Conservation Biology. And what I learned at the time is that it is in fact our duty as scientists to volunteer our time to try to educate people about the science itself. In fact, I had a meeting today with my two graduating seniors, so they're doing their senior projects with me. We talked about how important it is to translate science and to think about clever ways to maybe avoid phrases that immediately make people, immediately reject what you're saying. There's a woman named Catherine Hayhoe, who is a very masterful science communicator. She's from Texas and she's an evangelical Christian, but she is a global warming modeler. So she does computer simulation models about climate change and global warming. And she, I think what she has come around to say is that we have to communicate our science first and foremost. We have to help people think about solutions. And you also have to realize that no solution is perfect. I think we have a very naive, maybe superhero idea that there's going to be silver bullets and I'm not going to have to change my lifestyle. It's all going to be cool. And I can continue to build a 5,000 square foot house and I can have a 3-car garage. And this trajectory of consumption that's just been going up and up and up. And it's literally not sustainable. And once again, I think younger people completely know this. One of the things I did not mention is prior to working at Antioch College, I worked for 4 years at the Columbus College of Art and Design. I do a lot of work with artists, and I love working with artists and designers. These are the people who manufacture desire for objects we don't need. Think about the Keurig K-Cup. Your old coffee maker worked just fine, but somehow more and more of these K-Cups are taking more and more space in grocery stores. They're taking up more real estate because they want to sell you plastic. They want to make you pay more for individual servings of coffee. They want to sell you a new device that you don't need. So you got to throw out your old coffee maker and build a new one. So there are people who do this. And what I realized was that working at that College of Art and Design was working with people who make the things that we don't need and manufacture desire for things that we don't need. And those people should be our allies too. And so there are just so many different ways that we can work on this problem. And policy is one, science is one, psychology is one. I just feel like ultimately the common denominator to all of it is a recognition that we have to consume less. And maybe think about the greater good, which is, people call environmental scientists watermelons. You're green on the outside, but you're red on the inside. So that's literally a critique. But I do think that we have to be thinking about the greater good.
So we're at the end of our time, but I thought maybe we could get to one or two last questions. John's been waiting patiently, and Sean Devine had his hand up. I don't know if you want to come back, Sean, and say something, but John, go ahead.
Thanks so much. It seems to be one of the huge challenges that Kim faces with students is how to help them get lenses on the world. And I love the idea of looking at kind of the inventory of energy use in Yellow Springs and how that might tie into local stuff. But also there's this whole question about how to look at PBS NewsHour. Carbon capture is very controversial, and a bunch of folks in my realm would say that's smoke and mirrors for not looking at things that Project Drawdown is putting in front of us and saying, these are easy to do, these are well established. And so I bet it's a big part of what Kim's doing is to try to probably listen to a lot of the students and hear what they're seeing, and then help them to align them in order of what's workable. And it may be, what's workable for while they're students, but then there's the whole question of their work and where the best impact can happen.
Okay. Thanks a lot, John. Thanks a lot, Kim, and everyone for coming, participating. Good turnout tonight. So look forward to seeing you at more talks. And we have a few that are in the works. They'll be announced as we go along.
So Eric, can we all unmute and give Kim a loud applause?
Absolutely.
Earth Day every day.
Thanks, Kim. You're amazing.
Terrific.
Yes, great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Karen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.